I used to think the country was honest. Crickets, wind in the trees, old fences that don't lie. That was before my wife vanished between the porch light and the kitchen clock, and the house kept answering to a name I didn't know. My name is Michael Dunn, but most people call me Mike because it's easier to say when your mouth is tired. I sell timber and insulation to contractors who forget their shopping lists and make do with guesses. 6 months ago, I rented a place outside the town of Gable Ridge because my wife, Julia, said we needed quiet. She said the city had eaten her sleep and the neighbors' late-night arguments were moving into her head. Just a season, she told me, palms warm on my cheeks. Let's put our life somewhere that remembers how to breathe. The house at Lark Hollow sits on a slope, shoulder-deep in oaks and a long, obedient field. A 2-story structure with a porch that looks brave in daylight and shy at night. There's a narrow road that gets lost after the last mailbox, a creek that laughs at stones, and a barn that holds the sun in the morning like it was made for that purpose alone. The realtor said an elderly couple owned it until last winter. Daughters live out of state, she added, as if that excused the dust on the windowsills and the way the kitchen clock was 10 minutes fast for no reason anyone wanted to correct. Julia loved it on sight. She stood on the porch, closed her eyes, and said, "Listen, that's us if we're quiet enough." I listened and heard wind and oak leaves and something small moving in the grass. "Hear what?" I teased. She smiled sideways. "Margin." Moving took us 2 trips and the last of our packing tape. We brought a mattress, 2 lamps that never found their shades again, and a membership's worth of anxiety in mismatched boxes. We didn't bring the city's argument. We left that on the curb, and for a while we pretended it wasn't the kind of trash that follows you. For the first weeks, life fitted itself to the house like a polite guest. The porch was for coffee and weather talk. The kitchen learned our shoes. Julia took long walks without her phone, returned with pockets of acorns like small proofs. She slept through a thunderstorm for the first time in months. It was good, and if you've been tired long enough, good is a cathedral. The first wrongness was a small domestic joke that forgot to be funny. On the second Friday, I found a set of keys hung on a nail inside the mudroom door, a ring I didn't recognize. 2 ordinary house keys, 1 long brass key with a triangle head, and a small oval tag stamped number 3. I held them up. "Spare?" Julia wiped her hands on a towel and glanced up. The towel left a white print on the denim of her jeans like a soft argument. "Probably for the barn," she said. The barn had no lock. I tried anyway because keys ask questions. None of the new ones fit. The triangle key had that weight that means it belongs to something that wants to stay shut. "Maybe a storage locker," I said. "Maybe a past life," she said lightly, and took the ring, smiling like the problem would stay solved if we were kind to it. We settled into the sort of routine that makes you think routine itself is proof. I drove into town for work and added a half hour because country time keeps distances differently. Julia freelanced for a design firm out of Charleston and claimed she liked a desk that wasn't sure it would be a desk forever. In late afternoons, deer came out at the edge of the property and pretended they weren't watching us. We pretended we weren't watching them. Human truth. We are always being observed by the things we think are shy. 2 weeks in, the house learned our footsteps. 3 weeks in, it learned our silences. In the 4th week, a woman I'd never met waved at me from the end of the driveway like history had just caught up. She wore a red scarf that made the road look uninteresting. "You must be Mike," she said. "Guilty." "I'm Liza," she said, as if the world had been waiting for me to know that. "We used to come out here some summers. I keep the key to the mailbox so the carrier doesn't have to fight with it. Nancy, one of the daughters, asked me to check on things now and then." She smiled at a version of me I didn't recognize. "Tell Julia I'll come by Tuesday with jam." "How do you know Julia?" I asked. She blinked, then laughed at herself. That was presumptuous. She looks like a Julia. The last tenant, before you, her name was June. She tapped her temple. Names share closets in there. She handed me a small tote with floral fabric handles without asking if I wanted it. Inside, I could smell sugar and strawberries and work. That old clock in the kitchen, she added, like a postscript to a letter. Don't bother setting it. It wants to be 10 minutes fast. Ed used to say the house liked to be early so it could see if we were telling the truth. That night, we ate toast with jam and laughed about houses with personalities. We'll call the clock Ed, Julia decided. She set her tea in the windowsill and drew a heart in the fog the cup made. Imagine getting to be early for once. Imagine long enough and it becomes a plan. We woke earlier. We tried out running together and decided we didn't need to. We fixed a crooked fence post with a rock, the country solution, and congratulated ourselves on having learned something no one taught us. We had 2 good weeks, and another the kind you don't describe to anybody because they'll think you're bragging about being ordinary. On a Sunday morning in the 5th week, I found a paper taped to the inside of the back door. I say found because I don't remember putting it there, and Julia said she didn't either. It was a list typed in an old face you see in church bulletins and programs for community plays. Lark Hollow, instructions. 1. Porch light on if you're expecting. 2. Kitchen clock stays 10 minutes fast. 3. Mailbox, number 3, Wednesdays only. 4. Keep the triangle key. 5. If the phone rings after 2 a.m., don't answer the first time. I took it down and brought it to the table because some papers prefer witnesses. Did you put this here? I asked. Julia read it and smiled the smile she uses when confronted with someone else's superstition. I promise you I didn't spend my morning inventing guidelines for a house. Mailbox number 3, I said. We don't have assigned numbers out here. The highway box cluster does, she said. Maybe the old owners had a system. And expecting who? She leaned back in her chair and looked at the paper like it might confess if you stared politely. We could try it, she said. Try what? Being the kind of people who don't argue with the house. She set it back on the door 4 inches above the knob, perfectly centered. I'll turn on the porch light if I'm expecting you then. If it goes on in the middle of the night, you'll know I've decided I'd like to see you. It was a joke that tried to be flirtation. It worked. We kissed in the mudroom like teenagers hiding from parents who were long dead. On Wednesday afternoon, I checked the mailbox cluster at the bottom of the lane. 6 metal mouths on a post, each with a number stamped in a font that believed in postmasters. Ours was 2. Number 3 belonged to an address 2 miles east, if the carriers were to be believed. I opened it anyway because the list had asked me to be impolite. A single envelope waited inside. No stamp, no address, no return. Just a name written in calm pen. June. I closed the mailbox. I walked back to the house with my hand in my pocket and the other empty because I wasn't sure which sin would be bigger, stealing someone else's envelope or pretending it had nothing to do with me. When I reached the porch, Julia was sweeping pollen like it was a hobby. She glanced at my face and tilted her head. Well? Box 3 had a letter. Was it for us? It was for June. She leaned the broom against the rail. We should leave it. We could put it on the table and ask it who it belongs to, I said, trying for a smile and finding none. Invite the house to explain itself. Please, she said, and something in her voice made me open my hand and show her the not letter I had not taken. Liar, she added gently. I went back and took it. We sat at the kitchen table like 2 kids about to unwrap a present that might be a snake. The envelope was thick with a photograph inside. I slid the photo out and laid it in the square of sunlight that saved the table from being too serious. A picture of the house. Summer, maybe 3 years ago if the shape of the oak can be trusted to tell seasons. On the porch stood a woman around our age with dark hair gathered at her neck in a knot Julia sometimes wore when she was reading. Her hand rested on the porch post like it had always been there. On the back of the photo, in the same calm pen, Wednesday 7:10, porch light on. What is this? I asked. A note to someone who doesn't live here now, Julia said. She spoke as if the woman on the porch might hear and correct her. Do we put the light on? I asked, less to be helpful than to make the world pick a lane. Julia turned the kitchen clock to the wall. It's already 10 minutes fast, she said. Let's see who believes in it. At 7:06, with the house clock insisting we were late, we turned on the porch light. The bulb made a halo on the steps and drew moths with the soft arrogance of necessary things. At 7:10 exactly, a truck rolled up the drive and stopped short of the porch as if it remembered an instruction someone had given it. A man stepped out. He wore a plain ball cap and a careful beard, and the eyes of someone who'd learned to be polite because fights cost money. Evening, he said. June around? No, I said. She hasn't lived here for a while. I glanced at the photo and then at Julia and felt stupid for not having a number that made sense. The man sighed the sigh of someone who doesn't like math either. I can leave this with y'all, he said, holding up a plain brown parcel. No address. She knows to look. He set it on the top step and tipped his cap to no one. You're good people for leaving the light. Not everybody honors it. We didn't mean to honor anything, I said. Then you're honoring it right, he said, got back in his truck and left. We let the parcel sit for an hour because ignoring is how you keep rules from making you their employee. Then we brought it inside and set it on the table next to the photograph. We should not open it, I said. We should not, Julia agreed. We opened it. I put my pocket knife under the edge of the tape and lifted slow, like the wrong speed might offend the contents. Inside, wrapped in an old dish towel, was a ring of keys, not like the ones from the mudroom, heavier, older, the kind of iron you find in pictures. There was also a folded map, the kind printed by a town that believes its roads deserve ink, with 3 circles made in pencil and labeled like they expected to be read aloud. Gate, hatch, stone. Is this a treasure hunt? I asked. Or a grocery list, Julia said softly, and touched the key with the triangle head like an old friend. We argued until we made a decision, and then pretended we didn't argue at all. At dusk, we walked to the bottom of the field, where a rusted gate leaned into a ditch like a retired dancer. The triangle key fit the gate's old padlock. I swear it sighed when we turned it, grateful and offended. Beyond the gate was a stand of trees keeping a secret. We passed under and found what the map promised. A low rectangle of concrete half buried in leaves, a hatch with iron handles. The second key fit there too, stubborn at first, and then resigned. We lifted. It was heavier than we deserved and smelled like water that had made its own decisions and then regretted them. A set of narrow steps led down into cool air and a room that had not heard a radio in 30 years. I took my phone out for light. Julia did the same. The room was simple. Cinder block walls, a metal shelf, a wooden crate, an old chair that had given more than it had received. On the shelf, 6 mason jars, each with a folded paper under the lid, like a message in a costume. On the crate, a ledger book with a green cloth cover. Inside the ledger, names and numbers and the kind of tidy cursive that makes you wonder how many perfect people were taught to write by imperfect ones. Ruth, 3 vials, the first line read. Marley, Ventolin. W. James, paid late. The dates were last year, then months missing, then 3 entries from a spring that matched when the elderly owners were still alive. The last line wasn't a name. It was a sentence. Porch light, on safe. Julia sat in the chair and stared at the ledger like it had told her something she'd always pretended not to know. This is a gap, she said. Between what and what? Between the people who have medicine and the people who need it. She touched the names with a finger. Someone filled it. We should call someone, I said, the first refuge of the untrained. Who? She said. The people who let the gap exist? Liza, I tried. She'd bring jam, Julia said. We'd end the conversation with a recipe for cobbler. We sealed the hatch and locked the gate and walked back up the field with the kind of quiet that makes wind think it's being helpful. On the porch, the light attracted black gnats that wrote their autobiographies around the bulb and died mid-sentence. That night, Julia couldn't sleep. I know, because I couldn't either. She got out of bed at 2:07 and stood at the kitchen window with a glass of water she didn't drink. The house phone rang. We kept it because the realtor said you can't live in the country without a number for storms. The ringtone was a sound designed by a person who never trusted another person's heart. Julia stood very still and counted. It rang once, twice, 3 times. She didn't answer. The ringing stopped, then returned 5 minutes later, 1 ring only. She picked up. "Hello?" she said, voice small and brave. A voice said something I couldn't hear. She listened, then said, "Understood," and hung up. "What was that?" I asked from the doorway. "Wrong number," she said, and human history entered the room and sat down between us as if invited. Morning fixed nothing. I went to work and lifted pallets like the past had put rocks in them. I came home to a house that had fed itself on the day. Julia said she had emailed a client. Her laptop sat open to a screensaver that assumed the world still needed fountains. On Wednesday, I opened box 3 and found another envelope with June written on it like a greeting and a command. Inside, a note on lined paper torn from a spiral notebook, hole crumbs still clinging. "He's coming Saturday. Porch light on if it's safe." No name, no return, no instructions for people who weren't June. Julia turned the kitchen clock to face the room again, the hands at 10 minutes ahead like a kind of prayer. "Saturday," she said, making the word both problem and solution. "We could drive away," I said. "Where to?" she asked. "Anywhere maps stop believing themselves." "Lark Hollow doesn't exist on the maps that matter," she said. "We can leave and it will still write itself on our mail." We didn't leave. Saturday came polite and old. The sun used a voice that made me think of teachers whose names you never learn because all they do is hold the room in place. At 7:10, a man walked up the drive. Not the one from the truck. Taller, blonder, more expensive in the face. He wore a jacket that tried to be nothing and succeeded. He looked at the porch light and nodded like a tourist who had found the famous sign. "Evening," he said. "June?" "June's not here," I said. He smiled with only the top half of his face. "Then you must be the new message." "How can we help you?" Julia asked, stepping forward like the porch had introduced them. He tilted his head, studying her, then me. "Ed and Nancy made a good run of it," he said as if we were reminiscing. "But time has a way of solving problems. What I need tonight is simple. A set of keys that don't belong to you, a ledger you haven't read, and a phone number you haven't called." "We don't have your ledger," I said, telling the truth like a man proud of his accuracy. He laughed. "Of course you do." "Who are you?" Julia asked. "A neighbor," he said. "I keep the gap profitable." People say threatening, like it's always a big sound. Sometimes it's quiet, and you feel it in your teeth. He put a single sheet of paper on the step. On it, a list of names that looked like the ledger's cousins. Beside each name, a number with a $sign. "These debts don't die just because Ed did," he said. "Someone keeps the porch light on, someone keeps the hatch dry, someone sells time to people who can't afford it." "You're a loan shark for pain," Julia said. It wasn't a metaphor. He bowed slightly, recognizing himself like a mirror. "If you prefer poetry, it's the last business left that respects consequences." He held out his palm. "Keys." "What happens if we say no?" I asked. "Then you'll teach the house a habit it will pass along to the next nice couple," he said, and smiled in a way I will remember if I live to be old in a chair I despise. Julia didn't move. Neither did I. He waited a professionally acceptable number of seconds, then shook his head like a disappointed uncle. "We'll try again Tuesday," he said. "Leave the light on so I don't have to guess." He left footprints on the steps like he intended them to be studied. We brought the ledger up that night and put it on the table next to the photo of June and the parcel's empty towel. We read names out loud until they were people in our mouths. We said Marley and pictured a boy wheezing in a kitchen while his mother pretended not to cry. We said Ruth and saw a hand reach for dignity like it weighed more than air. We said W. James and disliked him without agreeing why. "What are we going to do?" I asked. "We're going to make the porch light mean something," Julia said. "How?" "We're going to pay off a debt without money. Monday night we went to Liza's to return the jam jar and request an old story. She showed us a photograph album with corners that curled like they were tired of being corners. Ed and Nancy posed by the hatch in 1999 with the pride of people whose secrecy was a hobby. They ran the box during a bad stretch, Liza said, meaning opioids without saying it. Kept folks alive between shame and paperwork. Most didn't know who to thank. "And the man who came by?" I asked. "Which one?" she said, too quickly. "The blonde neighbor," Julia said, too casually. Liza put her hand on the album like it might stand up if she didn't. "That's not a neighbor," she said. "That's a habit." She closed the book. Sometimes you can't tell who's keeping a place together and who's peeling it apart. Tuesday morning, I called in sick and drove into Gable Ridge with a box of photocopies from the ledger and a list of names scribbled by flashlight. I visited a storefront with a blue awning that promised public interest and low bono, and a woman at the desk who stabbed the air with a pencil when she spoke. She took one look and said, "We don't have the budget," and then softened when she saw my face. "But we know someone who doesn't need one." She wrote a name on a card and slid it over like medicine. The name belonged to a reporter who had once written a series about a pill mill and now did obituaries with a meanness she didn't hide. She listened, then asked, "You want to be anonymous and heroic, or dangerous and useful?" "Useful," I said. "Then you didn't come here," she said, and told me to buy a cheap scanner and a burner phone like I was shopping for shoes. Tuesday night, the blond man returned with his hands in his jacket pockets and his smile oiled. We left the porch light off. He stood in the yard and waited because men like him always assume people will correct themselves. We didn't. He walked to the bottom of the steps and sighed. "The house doesn't like this," he said. "Then the house can call the sheriff," I said, bluffing with a deck I couldn't shuffle. He looked at me with pity. "The sheriff's niece owes me $800, he said. "You can choose better allies." "I choose the people who leave jam?" Julia said from behind me. He laughed. "Good. Then make cobbler when you run." He left. We heard his truck on the road like something deciding whether to come back. 2 days later, the reporter called my burner phone and said 3 names out loud like she was trying on coats. "These are city names," she said. "Your ledger is the country face. If we tie them, you'll break something that doesn't heal neat." She asked if she could come out. I said no because I wanted one part of my life not to be a story yet. On Friday night, just after I turned off the light and we committed to not committing to sleep, Julia whispered, "I think we should go down to the hatch. Bring a jar." "Why?" "Because lists don't take care of themselves." We went. The night animals moved out of our way with the politeness wild things give you when they're not afraid yet. In the hatch, on the shelf, someone had left a new jar without telling us they knew the rules. Under the lid, a folded paper with a single line. "Saturday, 7 to 10, porch light on." "We can't keep doing this," I said. "We haven't started," she said. Saturday came like a deadline. At 7:10, a small line of 3 cars pulled into the drive. Ordinary cars driven by ordinary people with faces that said weather and work instead of menace. They stayed in their cars. Julia carried the parcel to the first, handed it through the window, and said a name like a blessing. The driver said thank you with the kind of sincerity that makes you turn away because sincerity done right is an intimate thing. The third driver was the woman from the rest area of my memory without knowing she had rented space there. "We know," she said to Julia. "We know what you're doing." "We're not doing anything," Julia said. "That's why it's working," the woman said, and drove away, careful. After we stood on the porch, breathing like we had finished a race and forgotten to tell our bodies. The blond man did not come. The house exhaled in the way of houses, boards ticking, pipes making church. That night at 2:05 a.m. the phone rang. We let it. It rang again at 2:10. We still let it. At 2:15, one ring, and Julia picked up. She listened and said, "Understood," and hung up. The porch light clicked on by itself. She stood in the doorway like a photograph waiting to be taken. "I have to go out," she said. "I'll come," I said. "You can't," she said, and kissed me like a contract. She left with the triangle key in her pocket and the confidence of someone who knows where the dark memorizes its steps. The house felt suddenly full of windows. I sat at the table with the ledger because I wanted company. At 3:30, something thumped the porch lightly, a delivery that didn't need a signature. I opened the door and found a single envelope. Inside, a photograph of Julia standing by the hatch, head turned away, hand on the handle. On the back, "Tell him it's almost done." At 4:11 a.m., the porch light turned off. At 4:14, the kitchen clock ticked wrong, skipped a second, then found it again. At 4:17, the phone rang once. I answered. No one spoke. I listened to breath that might have been wind. I said her name twice, and the line went dead. Julia didn't come back by sunrise, or by 9, or by noon. I called her cell. It went to a voicemail that had never learned how to comfort anyone. I drove the field and the road and the town and back again. I checked the hatch. The lock faced the correct way like a good boy. I called Liza because she deserved to be worried too. She came, jam and all, and sat at the table and wove worry into a fabric I could wear. At dusk, the blond man returned, alone this time, without a smile. He stayed at the bottom step like he could burn the house by looking. "When you choose a job," he said softly, "you should read the full description." "What did you do?" I asked. My voice surprised me by staying within the range that doesn't embarrass a body. He studied his nails for a second. "We don't do," he said. "We wait for people to do things to themselves." "Where is she?" "Finishing something," he said. "If you're lucky, she'll leave you a note." "Luck?" I said. I don't remember stepping forward, but I remember stopping because he didn't. He put an envelope on the step, like before, then left. Liza picked it up with 2 fingers like it might try to bite. Inside, a single page. Not Julia's handwriting, not the calm pen of the ledger, typed, no address, no greeting. "Nothing bad has happened to the woman you love that she didn't know how to choose. Leave the light on when you're ready." "I hate that man," Liza said softly. "I hate him with you," I said, and put the paper face down. That night I didn't sleep. At 2:00 a.m., I turned the porch light on because I wanted to keep my promises even when I didn't understand them. At 2:15, the phone rang one time. I answered, breathing. "Julia," I said. A whisper, too low to be anyone but her. "Michael, listen." "I'm listening." "If the kitchen clock stops, leave the house." "Why?" "Because that will be the house telling the truth," she said, and the line clicked like a coin falling off a table. The kitchen clock kept going. So did the house. Morning arrived, tired and blameless. I made coffee that tasted like decisions I didn't want to drink and sat on the steps. Liza brought a casserole because grief demands food even when it isn't allowed in yet. By evening, I decided to be a person who moves when asked. I took the ledger, the keys, the photograph of June, and the envelope that didn't have the decency to include a return address. And I drove to the public interest office with the blue awning. The pencil-stabbing woman was gone. In her place, a man who smiled like laws hurt him once. He took one look at the ledger and said, "We'll get sued." And then, bless him, "Okay." The reporter met us as if she'd been waiting in another room for the cue. She took the ledger like a story she wasn't sure she deserved. "If we publish," she said, "they'll say we made it up. If we don't, you'll think we made you up." "Publish," I said, "even if it makes a bad sound." She nodded and did that thing reporters do where the room turns into a notebook. "Do you know where your wife is?" "No," I said, "but I know what she asked the house to do." At home, the porch light burned until moths wrote their names and erased them again. I waited. I am still waiting, if you want the truth to be dull and useful. The phone rings once some nights at 2:15, and I answer, and no one speaks, and I say I'm here because that helps me breathe. The kitchen clock stays 10 minutes fast, and I respect it because it has a better memory than me. The hatch stays locked and the field keeps secrets, and I have learned not to apologize to distances I cannot cross. 2 weeks after Julia vanished between a porch light and a kitchen clock, a small package arrived with no return address and the kind of tape you buy when you've done this before. Inside, the triangle key on a string and a photograph of the country sky with stars doing their unhelpful, beautiful work. On the back, in Julia's hand, "Leave the light on when you're ready to know less." I hung the triangle key on the mudroom nail, where it chimes against the other keys in a tune only the house can read. I put the photograph of the sky in the ledger and closed it, because sometimes the best thing you can do for a story is give it a lid. I turned on the porch light before bed and left it that way, because I am practicing being the kind of man who can keep a promise to a room. People in town ask kind questions in grocery aisles. "Any news?" they say. And I say, "She's finishing something," because it sounds better than what I know. Liza sits with me on Tuesdays and brings jam I don't deserve, and some nights we don't talk because silence is the only sentence that fits. If the kitchen clock stops, I will leave the house. That is the only clear instruction I have. Until then, I oil the hinge on the screen door the way my father taught me. And I water the fig someone planted before we learned how to stay. And I write down the names in the ledger when I remember them because the ledger asked me to. This is not a story with a clean ending. The blonde man will read an article and hire a lawyer who collects phrases like paperweights. The reporter will publish and then receive a box of clippings of herself. Liza will teach me how to put up peaches as if it were the same thing as faith. And somewhere, there's a porch I don't know, with a light I can't see, where a woman with 2 good names finishes something and decides which one she'll write on the envelope before she sends it. Maybe I'll get a call one night and the line won't click. Maybe the kitchen clock will stop and I'll walk out of the house without taking anything because some instructions are meant to save you only once. Maybe none of that will happen, and the point is not the answer, but the practice of leaving the light on for whatever love decides to look like when it knows you can't demand explanations. I do what the list on the mudroom door told me to do the day we found it. The porch light is on when I'm expecting. The clock stays 10 minutes fast. I keep the triangle key. And if the phone rings after 2, I don't answer the first time. Sometimes at 7:10 on Wednesdays, I go down to the mailbox cluster and open number 3, even though it isn't mine and never will be. Some weeks, the slot holds nothing but air and the smell of old paper. Some weeks, there's an envelope stamped with a calm pen that says June, and I take it home and lay it on the table and wait for a house to tell a truth only it can afford. If this story kept you listening, if you felt the hush of the porch light and the ache of a house that knows things, please like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I share grounded, first-person psychological thrillers with open, haunting endings. Your support helps these stories reach the people who love them,